What if the Neanderthals had not gone extinct? Imagine walking into a cafe and sitting next to a man with a thick brow ridge, broad nose, and a barrel chest. He's not a tourist. He's not in costume. He's Neanderthal. And in this alternate reality, he never went extinct. For over 400,000 years, Neanderthals thrived across Europe and Western Asia. They survived ice ages, hunted mammoths, and even interbred with early Homo sapiens. But then, around 40,000 years ago, they vanished from the Earth. Or did they? What if they hadn't? What if, instead of being a footnote in evolutionary history, Neanderthals had continued evolving alongside modern humans? Would we share cities, governments, space programs? Would they outcompete us? Or would we be the ones facing extinction? Today, in What If 1688, we dive into one of the most mind-bending what could have been scenarios in human evolution. What if the Neanderthals had not gone extinct? Tens of thousands of years ago, Earth was not just home to Homo sapiens. It was a shared stage where two intelligent human species roamed the wild world, us and the Neanderthals. Neanderthals were not brutish cavemen, as once thought. They were adapted survivors, stocky, muscular, and built to endure freezing climates. Their brains were as large, if not larger, than ours. They used tools, wore clothing, buried their dead, and possibly even created art and music. They lived across a massive range, from modern-day Spain to Siberia, and for over 400,000 years, they thrived. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens were just getting started. Around 70,000 years ago, our species began its great migration out of Africa. When we reached Europe and Asia, we didn't find an empty continent. We found it already inhabited by these distant cousins. For thousands of years, the two species coexisted. So what happened? Most theories suggest a combination of factors: climate change, competition for resources, and even interbreeding contributed to the decline of the Neanderthals around 40,000 years ago. But what if that extinction never occurred? What if, instead of disappearing, the Neanderthals had survived, adapted, and evolved alongside us? In this new timeline, the world might look dramatically different, starting with how early humans and Neanderthals shared space. First, population dynamics would shift. Neanderthals, adapted to colder climates and harsh terrain, might dominate regions like Scandinavia, the Alps, and parts of Eastern Europe. Homo sapiens, more suited to warmer, open landscapes, might settle further south. This territorial division could lead to the development of distinct civilizations, languages, and cultures. Imagine history books not just talking about the Greeks, Romans, or Egyptians, but about the Neanderthal dynasties of the north, the tundra kingdoms, or the stone-voiced tribes of the Carpathians. Over centuries, shared borders would lead to trade, conflict, treaties, and maybe even hybrid cities where the two species lived side by side. And let's not forget the most intimate kind of interaction: interbreeding. We already know that 1 to 2% of the DNA in modern non-African humans comes from Neanderthals. That's evidence of historical mingling. If Neanderthals had survived, this genetic exchange might have continued, leading to an entire spectrum of hybrid descendants, some more Neanderthal-like, others more sapiens. Society would evolve around this diversity. Would schools teach about the differences in brain structures between species? Would workplaces adjust tools and environments for different body types? Would we have two kinds of Olympic Games, one for Homo sapiens, one for Neanderthals? But coexistence wouldn't be smooth sailing. Despite similar intelligence, cognitive and behavioral differences might create social divisions, even discrimination. We've seen how humans treat those who look or think differently, and in this world, it wouldn't just be about race or nationality. It would be about species identity. Would Neanderthals be treated as equals or as a subclass? History might include civil rights movements, not just for race or gender, but for Neanderthal equality. Statues in major cities might honor Neanderthal inventors, warriors, or even presidents. Alternatively, if tensions escalated, history could be full of Neanderthal-human wars, fought over land, ideology, or even survival. And here's where things get even more complex. Technological progress would likely accelerate in unexpected directions. With two distinct ways of thinking, innovation might take divergent evolutionary paths. Perhaps Neanderthals, with their robust memory and spatial skills, would dominate in engineering, navigation, or mining, while sapiens lean toward language, art, or software. In short, humanity wouldn't be a single thread. It would be a braided cord, woven from two species, two brains, two worldviews. And just imagine how that would shape our modern world. Fast forward to the 21st century. A world not ruled solely by Homo sapiens, but cohabited by two intelligent human species, sapiens and Neanderthals. This isn't just science fiction. It's a mirror held up to a different version of Earth, one where every city, every institution, every law and custom must accommodate two fundamentally different ways of being human. Let's begin with education. Neanderthals had larger skulls and different brain shapes. Studies of their cranial fossils suggest they may have excelled in visual memory, spatial reasoning, and pattern recognition, perhaps even more than Homo sapiens. On the flip side, they may have had less capacity for abstract language, multitasking, or symbolic thought. In a shared world, education would be differentiated by neurological strengths. Curriculums wouldn't be one-size-fits-all. Instead, there might be parallel systems tailored to how Neanderthal children learn best. More hands-on, more spatial, more visual. Standardized tests? Forget it. We'd need dual intelligence models and adaptive learning platforms. Now consider language. Some theories propose that Neanderthals had a simpler form of speech, possibly fewer vowels, a slower pace, or more gesture-based communication. If true, the world's linguistic evolution would be split. Would there be two global languages, one Homo tongue, one Neanderspeak? Would communication technology come with translation modes between sapiens and Neanderthals? It's likely we'd have Neanderthal poets, authors, and philosophers shaping a culture rich in oral tradition, song, and symbolism, adding a whole new dimension to the arts. In politics, the implications are massive. Would Neanderthals have voting rights? Would they hold office? Would constitutions include clauses about interspecies representation? In democracies, parties might rise to represent Neanderthal interests, focusing on their unique needs, such as environmental conservation. Neanderthals were likely more in tune with natural rhythms, physical infrastructure, and healthcare adapted to their physiology. Diplomacy would be more complex than ever. Imagine Neanderthal diplomats representing their communities at the UN. Imagine a mixed-species cabinet, or even a Neanderthal president or prime minister. In the workplace, ergonomics would evolve. Desks, vehicles, clothing, protective gear, all would need design adjustments for different skeletal frames. Even military and sports uniforms would differ. Neanderthals had broader shoulders, shorter limbs, and greater muscle density. Now, let's talk pop culture. In this world, movies would feature Neanderthal heroes. Comic book franchises would have Neanderthal Avengers, and fashion would reflect dual standards of beauty. Not one ideal, but two species aesthetics shaping runway trends and advertising. Think of the Olympics. Would sapiens and Neanderthals compete in the same events? Neanderthals might dominate in power-based sports, while sapiens might excel in endurance or agility. We might have two podiums, or just one world stage that celebrates biological diversity. Even relationships would redefine love and family. Interbreeding would continue, and we'd see hybrid children, challenging traditional views of identity. Society would create new legal definitions for kinship, inheritance, and lineage that span across species lines. Of course, challenges would persist. Prejudice, bias, and misunderstanding could spark interspecies tension. There could be Neanderthal rights movements, calls for species-based affirmative action, or protests over healthcare bias or media representation. But imagine, too, the power of cooperation. Joint scientific ventures. Space missions with mixed-species crews. Biotechnology harnessing Neanderthal immunity or strength genes. New forms of art and architecture fusing visual spatial genius with abstract human creativity. The world would be richer, more complex, and more interwoven than ever. We'd no longer ask, what does it mean to be human? We'd ask, which kind? If Neanderthals had never gone extinct, the course of evolution, both natural and artificial, would have taken an entirely different route. With two intelligent hominin species coexisting on Earth, we wouldn't just be sharing sidewalks or schools. We'd be sharing genes, diseases, habitats, and the future of our own species. Let's start with genetics. Today, about 1 to 4% of the DNA in non-African modern humans comes from Neanderthals, remnants of interbreeding that occurred tens of thousands of years ago. But in a world where Neanderthals never died out, this genetic exchange wouldn't be ancient history. It would be ongoing, active, and intentional. We would see a rise of hybrid populations, individuals born from sapiens-Neanderthal unions, combining traits from both species. Over time, entire regions might evolve into blended communities, leading to a more genetically diverse humanity, with varying brain structures, immune systems, and even aging processes. But with that genetic blending comes complex challenges. Would there be reproductive barriers or genetic incompatibilities? Would some unions face higher risks of disease or cognitive dysfunction? Would certain hybrid lineages be stronger or weaker than their pure species ancestors? This would push genetics to the forefront of medical research. Doctors and scientists wouldn't just study one species' genome. They'd map and analyze two separate genetic blueprints, each with unique strengths and vulnerabilities. Neanderthals, for example, had stronger bones, thicker skulls, and robust immune responses adapted to harsh climates. These traits could offer clues to treating osteoporosis, autoimmune disorders, and even help in organ regeneration. On the other hand, Neanderthals may have lacked certain immune defenses against viruses that evolved in more tropical zones, making them more susceptible to certain modern pathogens. Healthcare wouldn't be universal. It would be species-specific. Hospitals would have separate departments for Neanderthal and sapiens patients. Drugs would be tested on both. Vaccine responses, anesthetics, even recommended diets, all would be personalized not just to an individual's weight, age, or gender, but also their hominin classification. Now, let's talk about the environment. Neanderthals were hunter-gatherers deeply embedded in nature. They built no cities, but they were expert trackers, resource managers, and survivalists. If their culture had evolved alongside ours, ecological stewardship might look vastly different today. Would climate change be less severe if Neanderthals had influenced early industrialization? Perhaps they would have resisted large-scale deforestation, overmining, and pollution, leading to greener cities, biophilic architecture, and a stronger human-nature connection embedded into governance. Their survival instincts could have made them excellent conservationists, or even guardians of Earth's last wild frontiers. In modern times, you might see Neanderthal environmental ministries, charged with preserving endangered ecosystems or developing sustainable urban planning that aligns with ancient landscape rhythms. And yet, differences in lifestyle could create conflict. Imagine a sapiens megacity expanding into a region inhabited by Neanderthal tribes who refuse industrial encroachment. Would international courts recognize Neanderthal land rights the same way we do indigenous territories today? Would their worldview, deeply tied to seasonal cycles, oral tradition, and ancestral landscapes, clash with the fast-paced, technology-heavy culture of Homo sapiens? Or would it force sapiens to slow down and reconsider the cost of progress? In either case, the scientific potential is staggering. By observing Neanderthals in modern ecosystems, biologists could unlock prehistoric knowledge lost to time. Natural medicines, adaptive hunting techniques, even clues to Ice Age plant life or extinct animal behavior. Anthropologists would gain a living model of how ancient hominins thought, felt, and survived. Psychologists could study alternate forms of intelligence. Sociologists would analyze cross-species integration and cooperation in real time. In short, Neanderthals wouldn't just change how we live. They would change what it means to be alive. They would act as a bridge to the past, and possibly a shortcut to the future, offering new directions for evolution, ethics, and survival on a planet that's running out of time. For most of recorded history, Homo sapiens have walked the Earth with a powerful belief that we are unique, that we are the pinnacle of evolution, the only intelligent species capable of art, language, spirituality, and culture. But in a world where Neanderthals never went extinct, that belief would be shattered. Instead of one intelligent species reflecting on the meaning of life, we would be two hominin species asking the same questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? What happens after we die? Religion would change, radically. Let's imagine early religious thought forming not in isolation, but in direct cohabitation with Neanderthals. These were not just wild animals. They buried their dead, possibly used symbolic objects, and had complex social bonds. Some scientists believe they may have had rudimentary spirituality, maybe even beliefs in an afterlife. Would early Homo sapiens see them as equals or as lesser beings? Would Neanderthals be allowed to join religious institutions? Or would entire faiths form around the belief that sapiens are divinely chosen and Neanderthals are not? You might see scriptures debating whether Neanderthals have souls, or holy texts written by Neanderthals with entirely different moral codes, myths, and cosmologies. Fast forward to modern times, and theology would have to evolve. Priests, imams, rabbis, monks, all would need to address the question, are we alone in the eyes of God? And what about art? Today, we assume that abstract thinking, imagination, and storytelling are distinctly human. But archaeological evidence suggests Neanderthals may have created simple engravings, musical instruments, and cave art. If Neanderthals had survived, it's likely their own aesthetic traditions would flourish, different styles, mediums, perhaps even nonverbal symbolic languages based on gesture, scent, or texture rather than speech or writing. Art museums might have entire wings dedicated to Neanderthal expression, not as historical curiosities, but as contemporary culture. Music, theater, and dance might reflect dual species influences, blending sapiens rhythm with Neanderthal memory. You could walk into a concert where the percussion is inspired by sapiens tradition, but the melodies follow a scale based on Neanderthal breathing patterns, a haunting primal tone that moves something ancient inside you. Now let's consider language. Would Neanderthals develop their own spoken tongue? Would their vocal cords and skull structure allow speech as we know it? Some paleoanthropologists argue that they likely had some form of language, perhaps more tonal, rhythmic, or emotional than ours. If both species had lived side by side, there could be entire bilingual communities, or even pidgin languages blending sapien structure with Neanderthal sounds. Schools would teach Neanderthal linguistics. Writers and poets would emerge from both sides, perhaps even co-authoring dual-species literature. But beneath all this artistic and intellectual flourishing lies a deeper issue, identity. What does it mean to be human if we are not the only ones who think, feel, and create? This question would echo through philosophy. Thinkers like Descartes or Nietzsche would write not about the self in isolation, but the self in contrast with another intelligent species. Ethics would revolve around cross-species morality. Can a Neanderthal be president? Should sapiens and Neanderthals marry? Who gets to decide what civilized means? Academic fields would shift. Anthropology wouldn't just study ancient hominins. It would actively analyze living Neanderthal societies. Psychology would compare emotional intelligence across species. Philosophy departments might split between sapiens existentialism and Neanderthal phenomenology, exploring how their different brains perceive time, fear, joy, or death. Even comedy would change. What does satire look like in a multi-species world? Could sapiens and Neanderthals laugh at the same joke? Or would the punchline itself be a cultural battleground? In the end, the survival of Neanderthals wouldn't just change history. It would force sapiens to redefine humanity itself. We would no longer see ourselves as the apex species, but as one branch of a much larger, richer evolutionary tree. One that's still growing, still learning, and still asking, what does it truly mean to be alive, aware, and part of something greater? If Neanderthals had not gone extinct, we wouldn't just be rewriting our history, we'd be redefining our future. Imagine two intelligent species evolving side by side for tens of thousands of years. One, Homo sapiens, fast, agile, technologically driven. The other, Neanderthals, physically stronger, deeply intuitive, possibly more emotionally grounded. What happens when both reach the space age? First, we must ask, would we have peace or perpetual tension? History shows us that even within Homo sapiens, tribalism runs deep. Ethnic conflicts, wars, colonization, all born from the fear of the other. Now replace cultural differences with biological ones. Different brains, different physiques, even different body languages. Would sapiens governments treat Neanderthals as equals or as second-class citizens? Would they live in integrated neighborhoods or in designated zones, much like historical ghettos or reservations? Would mixed species relationships be accepted or banned? If Neanderthals had their own communities, their own schools and political parties, would they demand autonomy, independence, nationhood? Imagine a world where a Neanderthal-led state petitions for UN membership, sparking global debate on species rights. International laws would need massive overhauls. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights might have to become the Universal Declaration of Sentient Rights, expanding protections to all intelligent species, sapiens, Neanderthals, maybe even future AI. And what about science? Biotechnology would explode. Geneticists would compare Neanderthal DNA to sapiens, not in ancient samples, but in living bodies. Cures for diseases, enhancements to muscle growth, longevity genes, even mental health insights, all potentially hiding within Neanderthal biology. Companies might pay millions to sequence a Neanderthal's genome, or worse, commodify it. By the strength of a Neanderthal in pill form, ethical lines would blur. And here's where it gets even more complex. Reproduction. If interbreeding were possible, as we know it was in our shared past, would modern society support or resist it? Would we see the rise of hybrid offspring, children carrying both sapiens and Neanderthal traits? These children could face a unique identity crisis, not fully accepted by either group. Or they could become a bridge species, helping unite two worlds into one. In this possible future, humanity wouldn't be defined by Homo sapiens alone. It would become multi-species, with diversity not just in skin color, language, or belief, but in biology itself. Space exploration would also evolve. Neanderthals, with stronger bodies and possibly higher tolerance to radiation, might be better suited for deep space missions. They could become the first colonists on Mars, while sapient scientists lead mission control from Earth. Together, the two species might build a civilization beyond Earth, powered by both brute force and advanced technology. But it wouldn't be a smooth ride. Political movements could emerge, warning about the Neanderthal threat. Fake news and propaganda might incite violence. Riots could break out in cities where jobs or housing are seen as unfairly distributed. History would repeat, unless we learn. Because the greatest risk wouldn't be war or division. It would be the failure to recognize shared sentience. Just like we've failed for centuries to respect the Earth, animals, or even fellow humans based on superficial traits, the survival of Neanderthals would force us to grow up, to evolve ethically, not just biologically. It would be the ultimate test of our empathy, our morality, and our capacity for coexistence. So, what if the Neanderthals had not gone extinct? We might live in a world richer, deeper, more complex, where humanity isn't one species, but a symphony of minds, voices, and perspectives. Or we might fall into the same old patterns of fear, dominance, and destruction. It all comes down to one question. Could we learn to share the planet and the future with another version of ourselves? What do you think? If Neanderthals had survived, how would your life, or the world, be different? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey through time and evolution, please like, share, and subscribe to What If, where we explore the possibilities that could change everything. Thanks for watching and imagining.